One of the things that became very clear when you go through these letters and emails carefully, that they're not just emotional. They are instructional. They are giving direction indirectly and sometimes very much direct. They are teaching me something. They're teaching me what my role is at this time, what I was supposed to be in life, and who I was supposed to be in his life. And one of the clearest expectations that appears again and again in these documents is protect him, cover him, guard him, keep his secrets, protect. So let me show you one example of how this was illustrated in a handwritten letter or typed out letter. He typed this one out, dated December 10th, 2005. In this letter, he says, push past what people will think, because as long as we keep our stuff tight, people will only know what we show, what we say or show. Then, so that sentence is important by itself, because that sentence is doing a lot of work, right? Because what it is acknowledging is very directly, there is something happening that cannot be publicly seen. Whatever it is that we're doing, it cannot be seen. It needs to be protected. It needs to be guarded in the name of Jesus, kind of thing. And the responsibility for maintaining that secrecy isn't just his. It was being placed on me. When we look at that, we kind of interpret that language a little bit. You have to look closely at the structure of the sentence there. Push past what people will think. In other words, ignore outside perception. Anything that you might see coming from the outside that feels like it's not supporting whatever it is that's going on, you need to push past that. And then the next part, as long as we keep our stuff tight. Now secrecy becomes a shared duty. It becomes the responsibility of both of us. And finally, people will only know what we say or show. That is not accidental language. That you don't put that into a message and string of sentences and paragraphs haphazardly. That is intentional. That is the language of narrative control. We need to control this narrative. I'm going to teach you how, because you're not well equipped, and I'm going to groom you to show you how to do this. And so there was some emotional recruitment that I think we should also talk about. Earlier in the same letter, he writes something else that becomes important for understanding how this dynamic works. He says, you bring something to me that I have never had. I want you there, I need you there, that kind of thing. Statements like this create emotional gravity, because now the relationship isn't framed as inappropriate. It's framed as necessary. He needs me. And I felt that, not just from him. Like, you got to understand, like, this is a whole operation, in the sense that there were other bad actors playing into this. Other leaders, other lay members, family members, people in high authoritative positions were playing into this, reinforcing this idea that I need to be close to him no matter what. So that brings me to the concept of loyalty conditioning, right? The language of loyalty conditioning, or the language of loyalty in this conversation, appears repeatedly across the emails and the messages, right? He said, and this is a quote, loyalty comes without price tag. I do for you because I love you and care. That may sound harmless on the surface and again in isolation, but we now know at this point that these are not isolated events. These are a series of a pattern of communications that when you step back and look at things holistically, you recognize what is happening here. This is grooming. But within a church structure, especially a hierarchical Pentecostal structure, loyalty has a very specific meaning. Loyalty means you do not question the leadership. Loyalty means you protect your leadership. Loyalty means you keep certain things inside the house. I mean, black people, we know all too well what that looks like at the home as well. So the psychological dynamics that are at play here are important. What's happening in these documents is actually a classic manipulation dynamic that, many researchers who study spiritual abuse and grooming often describe. First, the authority figure establishes emotional dominance, emotional dependence, and then they establish exclusive trust. And then after that, they establish shared secrecy. We see this in the areas of all types of abuse that are in this family, right? Once those three elements, emotional dependence, exclusive trust, shared secrecy, once those three elements are in place, the younger or less powerful person begins to feel responsible for protecting the authority figure. Realization, right? When I look back at these three things and I look back at these letters now and emails, what stands out to me isn't just the emotional language. It's how often, the relationship is framed as something that has to be protected from outside scrutiny, outside harm. How often I was just conditioned to believe that there was this huge enemy force that can infiltrate at any time. I needed to be prepared. I needed to know how to fight. That's the part that reveals what was really happening. So, the broader insight onto this is one of the most misunderstood parts of grooming inside of religious environments. People often imagine secrecy being enforced with threats. And in some cases, in my story, it was not by his hand. It was the threat of my relationship to God and where I would go. Hell, and disobedience, and demonic forces. All of these things, were the threats. But more often, secrecy is built through loyalty and emotional obligation. The person being groomed begins to feel like protecting the leader is the right thing to do. I won't even stop there. I will say that the whole congregation was conditioned that way. Some of us more than others, because the closer we were to the man of God, the higher to whom much is given, much is required. That kind of thing was always. So everybody felt like they had the same duty, but some of us felt more so than others because we were closer. He would make us feel, because you're closer to me, you have more responsibility. When you read these documents closely, you start to see that pattern everywhere. Emotional dependency, loyalty language, secrecy framing, narrative control. Those elements appear repeatedly. When you put all these documents together, the relationship stops looking like misunderstanding. You can no longer confuse this relationship. It starts looking like something much more structured, something much more deliberate. And, this becomes important for what happens next in the story, because eventually the situation, it didn't stay contained inside the letters and private messages. Eventually, the institution itself stepped in. And I'll tell you how.